And we're looking at the first chapter of Ruth, Ruth chapter 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. And a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Kilian. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Kilian also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. When she heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, Naomi and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you, as you have shown to your dead and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud, and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I'm too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me." At this they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the 2 women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thank you so much. How was the cake and coffee? Okay, I'll put that water there. Thank you so much for reading that, Stephen. We are going to be looking a little bit today around the situation that we find in the first chapter of Ruth. To say there's so much going on is an understatement. So there will be elements of the story, we'll be here till 3 o'clock if I get to every single piece of the story. I'll be highlighting bits of the story that I feel God has highlighted to me for you. But if you see elements of the story where you think, gosh, that's really speaking to me, please, please, please write it down. This is the whole thing about the Bible speaking for itself and reading you. There's that sense of we're reading it in community. So, if you only listen to my piece, it's just a small part of the jigsaw. So there could be elements that come alive to you that maybe I won't go deeply into, but please hear that's the whole point of doing the Bible together in community. It's that sense of you seeing something and hearing something and writing it down. I loved one or two conversations I had in between the last session and this around some things that were stirring in people as they were starting to look at that beginning bit of Ruth. So let's keep the conversation going together. So it doesn't really get an awful lot worse than the situation we find ourselves in the narrative of the beginning of Ruth chapter 1. If you've read the book of Judges, you're already thinking, goodness me, maybe hopefully now when I get into the book of Ruth, it'll get a bit better. I don't know, I don't know if you have a Netflix problem as well, but it's the compulsion of story, right? So you read a story, and I don't know if you're ever like me. Sometimes I watch things through thinking, oh no, either you think, please don't do that. What are they doing? What are they thinking? Or if you're watching something and then you think, oh, this is going horribly wrong, I've got to watch the next episode, right? And you fall into that trap of it's 9 p.m. and you think, I'll just watch one. Yeah? I'm just going to watch one. I'm a disciplined, person. I'll be in bed by 10:30, and then you watch it, and the story starts to take a tragic turn, and you're like, oh, I can't believe this. Who wrote this story? My goodness. And sometimes you read the book of Ruth, and you think Jeremiah must have written this, but obviously Jeremiah didn't write it. So, and you're thinking, oh, goodness me, how is this going to change? And you put the next episode on, and then there's another hook. And you get to the end of that episode, and come on, confession's good for the soul, we're in community. You get to that end, and you think, oh, just one more. Just one more, and then it'll all be okay. And then you get to midnight, and you think, I really have lost the plot here. And the book of Ruth, really, in a good way, I hope, is a little bit like that. You're starting to get caught into a story where you're thinking, no! How could this possibly be? How on earth can something like this be sitting into this bigger frame of the story of the Bible? Like, what is going on? Who is in control and who is not in control? Who is absent and who is present? What is going on? And I don't know if your prayer life can sometimes be a bit like my prayer life when I often cry out and say, where are you, God? Maybe I'm amongst the sort of more holy saints here who don't pray those prayers. But, I regularly find myself on my knees calling out to God and asking him in situations, where are you? And he hasn't fallen off his throne yet. Has anybody noticed that? No, he hasn't fallen off. I'm really pleased that you all feel confident that the Lord has not fallen off his throne. But there is famine. Right? There's famine in the land. And there are events such as pestilences. Our name for that would be pandemics. Right? There's illnesses ravaging the land. The situation is so bad in Bethlehem. Bethlehem, the house of bread. The name Bethlehem means the house of bread, the place where you get fed. The place of resource is now no longer a place of resource. The bread has gone. When Jesus prays, give us today our daily bread. I bet the people in the book of Ruth were praying that prayer. Give us today, God, our bread. Where has the bread gone? There's a famine in the land. And Elimelech and family realize that they can no longer stay where they live. You know, the Bible is a story of migration, of refugees. And actually, on the heart of God is how we embrace and welcome and give hospitality to those who come from other lands for so many different reasons. And Elimelech suddenly becomes a refugee with his wife Naomi and their 2 sons, and they head to Moab. Let me just say this. So we looked, didn't we, on the canon. In the history of the story, it's really important to know that Moab's really important to know about, because they are heading to a place where they are seriously despised. There's no love lost between Moab and Israel. It's been a really seriously bad history for so many different reasons. God himself seems to pen elements of this, saying to the Israelites, don't have anything to do with the Moabites, which makes this story head-scratching when we get into it. And so we reach a place where they must have been desperate to go to a place that was not safe. They must have been desperate. And as a result, they settle in the place, and Ruth marries into this family that have arrived. Now, let's not forget. We could stop there for a minute. I don't want to rush this. You can read the first verse or two and think, all right, we read it like a story, and it is a story, but let's translate it into our lives. Like, there's a huge pandemic that's ravaging the area. There's no food, and they're heading for their lives into a place that's not safe. How much trauma is already outworking in that beginning, even before we get to anything else? The level of disruption. You know, we often laugh and we say, what are the most stressful things that happen to us? Well, there's numbers of things. One of them is moving house, isn't it? Imagine moving and leaving behind just complete desolation and heading somewhere that you don't even know how it's going to work out there. And so Ruth marries into this family, into a society that is what I would call, or what is actually labeled as, is patriarchal, where the oldest male is at the center of the household, through which all ancestral descent is determined. So if you want to hand anything on to the next generation, if you want anything done, it happens through the oldest male in your family. It's really important to remember that. They've moved into a difficult place. There's been a marrying of Ruth into this family, and it's in an environment where anything ever happens, it happens through the oldest man. If the oldest male is not present, or no males are present, there's a problem in how you get things done. And so Ruth and Naomi find themselves facing a number of huge problems: hunger, disease, infertility. You know, she'd been married for 10 years with no children. And then in further on in chapter 4, it says God enabled Naomi to conceive. That's jumping the story a bit. But I want you to know that quite often we don't think about that part of the story, of the frustration there must have been when there were no children taking place, or happening, or coming forth. And then we get to the point of, in the midst of all of that, so this is 10-year period, it could have been longer. So there was scarcity, there was this difficulty, there was this unsettledness. Then all of a sudden, just when they probably thought, it's been a really rough decade, has it not? All the men die. Elimelech, Mahlon, and Kilian. Nikki and I got married 21 years ago, and it's felt like 3. Like it's felt, just getting the brownie points in. Felt like 3. It's been wonderful. Never any problems, never any challenges, and then I'm going to confess my lying spirit in a minute. But actually, when you get married, you have a whole pile of hopes and dreams, don't you? And one of our dreams was to start a family. And I'll never forget early on in our marriage, my wife sitting down at the table with me, and again, I don't know what table, where it was, what color the plates were, but, we were sitting at a table anyway, having something to eat, and she told me about a dream she had about a blonde boy. And I remember first thinking, a blonde boy? I thought I was your blonde boy. And then she said, no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a little boy. I had a dream about this little boy, blonde boy, who was sitting on my lap. And she said, I saw him, and he was we were in the bedroom doing something, and then he walks in, and he came and he sat on my lap, and I never felt such a deep sense of joy. So she said, it's time to start a family. So I was really glad about the announcement, that it was time to start a family. And so we were like, great, let's start a family. And year 1 goes by. Year 2 goes by. Year 3 goes by. All your friends now have had one, and they're on their second. Year 4 goes by. Year 5 goes by. Year 6 goes by. You're asking your friends what seat they're sitting on at church because they're falling pregnant like every other year. I said, what seat are you sitting on? I'm going to sit there, And do you know, and we were I was co-leading a church at the time, and can I gently say this? Do you know the worst place to sometimes be suffering is the church? Because we try to make things better by saying the wrong things, right? When sometimes all people want you to do is sit with them and put your arm around them and say, I'm with you. I've got your back. The amount of verses I got, I had things cast off me, jumped off me, pushed off me. I had people come in our house and praying the Masonic curses off me. Literally throwing oil over my garden. I experienced the whole craziness of the church. All well-meaning people coming up to me and saying, no, I'm not kidding you. Things like, wear loose underwear. I'm your pastor. There is a line. I'm your pastor. Line crossed over it, cliff off the end. Public stoning, 3 o'clock car park. Okay. And I found myself working through this intensity of believing in a story of fullness and health, but experiencing lack and testimony of lack. And couldn't quite believe it. The best one was the verse I gave you, that God has plans for you to prosper you. And I just said, go read Jeremiah, the whole book, and go and read who Jeremiah was talking to and why. I don't want to fully embrace that one. I'm not waiting 70 years for anything. And anyway, can I just say that? If there's people in your community of faith who are really experiencing this pain, any kind of pain, even whatever it is, whatever their pain is, put your arm around them. Give them something to eat. What did Jesus do with it? What did the Lord do with Elijah? He had something to eat. So sit under that tree. He didn't call the elders in. He didn't have Moses playing a harp and the angels doing breakdancing and all. There wasn't any of that. He said, sit down and eat, drink, rest. You're depressed. Sleep. I'm going to comfort you. And so we went through this serious pain. And actually, it's that in the story of Ruth, she must have had serious shame, because in that culture, it was shameful not to have children, and not to have children straight away. Shame. And I have to say, we felt that. We felt that sense of shame and of loss, and it went on for such a long time. Until one day, Nikki said to me, you're not going to believe this. And I thought, oh no, somebody's stolen the car. Because obviously I'm a man of great faith. You're not going to believe this. She said, I'm pregnant. And I thought, sometimes we banter, and I thought, no, she would not banter about that. That's a bit way too near. So, valuing all the limbs I've got, I didn't say anything and said, okay, well, look, show me. So we had a look. We had a look at the pregnancy test, and she was pregnant. And we thought, wow, this is incredible. Only for that child not to make it to the end of the pregnancy, and our son died on our wedding anniversary. And there was that sense, and I'm really genuinely not telling you this story so you can feel sorry for me and give me lots of cake later. But I'm telling you it because my story's not disconnected with the bigger story. The bigger story that's happening through the ages. And we wept. We wept. We said, Lord, not only have you, this was the language, okay? And it's okay, because listen to Naomi. I remember screaming out to the Lord and saying, not only have you taken my son from me, you've now destroyed a day that symbolized hope. Where are you? And I found myself leading a church, totally believing in God, but actually wondering whether he was good or not. Have you ever had those times in your life where you think, God, I'm really finding it hard to see your goodness. Where are you? What are you doing? So that was a really difficult period of time. And I'm going to jump on a really, really, really long way because we felt we wanted to give time to heal, time to not jump and do anything else. And a number of years later, I was walking along Cefn on Sea, seafront, which is where my wife comes from, a good old South End girl. And I was walking along the seafront, and we talked about adoption. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm being really honest with you. Oh, I'm standing too near. Somebody did tell me, don't stand too near. I'm really worried you're going to fall off. I heard this voice in my head say, what about adoption? And do you know what my response was? I don't want somebody else's child. I'm just exposing my heart. And then I heard the Holy Spirit say really clearly to me, but you're adopted. And I said, no, I'm not. I've got birth parents. They live in the valleys, man, in South Wales. You know John and Esther from the Swansea Valley. Like, come on. He said, no, I adopted you. And something hit me. Something hit me really hard. And we went on a process. And to cut a very long story short, we get sent this. Because it's like, seriously, when you go through this process, it's so impersonal. It's unbelievable. People just come into your life and ask you questions that no other parent would have to answer. Like you said, we had social workers for a week. And I love any social workers. You're doing an amazing job. Okay, I just want to make that clear. The social worker we had was truly outstanding. But the questions that we were asked were just quite hilarious. I was asked about previous girlfriends. Oh, how did that go? Well, not very well, by the looks of it. I think we can work out that didn't work out. Yes, but we were like really went through the mill, and we reached a point where we passed panel, and they sent us a link of a little boy who was looking for a home, a forever home, because he'd had such a serious, abusive first year or two of his life. Anyway, long story short was, Nikki said to me as we were walking in, we were chatting together, and we felt that when we were going to open this case file, God was going to speak deeply into it. Now, you've got to remember, we're walking around with our pain. I'm just being honest with you guys. I really hope you don't mind me being honest with you. But I was walking around with a wound. And there's still scars on my back now that are there. I haven't got answers to them. But I reached that point as we walked in where we felt maybe God's going to talk to us. And as we sat down and we opened Dominic's case file, we opened up his name, and then underneath was his date of birth. And his date of birth was the exact due date of our son who died. And I can't tell you that level of emotion, sitting there in front of a panel, trying your best not to lose it. It reminded me of Psalm 56, verse 8. You have collected all my tears in your bottle. You keep track of all my sorrows. You have recorded each one of them in your book. Let me tell you this morning. He remembers your pain. He remembers your pain. And sometimes we don't go there with God because we don't think He's there. And in the darkest moment of our lives, He's in those places waiting for us to meet with Him. So we see in this story that there's some really difficult, painful things happening. The Levirate law stated that a man should accept responsibility for his deceased brother's childless widow. Right? So there was a way out. Your brother-in-law could help you. But all the men had died. They'd lost everything. And they were by themselves. They had no other men to rely on. Verse 5, it says that Naomi was left without her two sons and husband. It's a significant crisis. There's no seed to carry on the family line. They are suddenly unfamily. They are on the margins. They are outside. And I think of the pain of grief, loss, and devastation that maybe in our stories we find, because our stories are ones of great hope, are ones of victory, but they're also ones of pain and loss. And if we don't allow the Holy Spirit in those moments to connect with us in those times, then I still feel like we carry a lot of stuff that God isn't asking us to. And so they return. What's really interesting here is there's this big debate. Now imagine if you'd said to somebody, I'm going to give myself up, I'm going to give my life to you, and they just go away. Right? Naomi was really doing her best to go clear off. And what's interesting here, and it's a very important detail, in the midst of all this pain and difficulty, you'd have thought that when Naomi said to Ruth and Orpah, well, Orpah took her up in it in the end, but when she said, go back to your family and to your gods, really key, really key. Go back to what you know and worship your gods, be with your family. You'd have thought that actually the most likely thing to do would have been to go back to your family, to your comfort, to a place of safety and a place of haven. But Ruth doesn't do that. She's like, no, I'm coming with you. Your God will be my God, your people. I don't know if she knew what she was actually saying. But something happens there that if you jump over it, the rest of the story suddenly doesn't feel so joined up. There's something happening here. God is hidden, but is He absent? Can she really say something like that without the Spirit of God, maybe, at work? I don't know. It's a question that I have. And so they return. Naomi and Ruth. They hear that the house of bread has bread again. So maybe God isn't absent after all. And Ruth, she does something exceptional. She aligns herself with Naomi, someone who's more vulnerable than her. She could have stayed in Moab, as I said, and remarried. She didn't. And Naomi can do nothing. Naomi can do nothing for Ruth. Naomi is an old woman. She's got no prospect of marrying and passing on the family line. In fact, she's actively discouraging Ruth because she knows that if they go back together, Ruth hasn't got much of a chance. No man, a Moabite, back into Bethlehem. Danger. This is seriously, seriously difficult. And they embark on an unbelievably dangerous venture. Now, why am I saying this? Women traveling by themselves. What is the time that we're talking about? It's the time of the judges. It's not safe. It's just not safe for them to be together, walking together. And so they head back. And I think this venture says something about Ruth and her courage. Can I tell you, the more I read Ruth, the more I see the courage of this young woman, and I'm inspired. I'm inspired by the courage of this young woman. She is actively entering hostile territory. Now, I'm a West Ham fan. Don't boo, please, don't boo. I'm a West Ham fan because, I'm not the kind of person living 2 miles from the stadium to support Man City. No dig at anyone. And I've got all these younger people growing up in the family, and I'm like, who do you support? And they go, Man City. I said, have you ever been to Manchester? Once. I'm just messing. Anyway, so I thought, no, I'm going to support West Ham. I grew up around the stadium and support West Ham. And I'll never forget the time when we went to Leeds United to watch the game. And when we turned up, it was clear that there were all the away supporter tickets had sold. And we had West Ham shirts on, but we weren't daft enough to at least put a coat on and zip it right up. And we looked at each other and they said, but there are tickets in the home end. Now, this is very trivial compared to the story. I'm just trying to lighten the story a bit, okay? And so the three of us said, yeah, let's buy them. We bought the tickets. We zipped ourselves up. My friend was such a cockney. He was like, all right, mate, how's it going? All right, sorted, mate, sorted, yeah. Apples and pears, dog and bone. He talked cockney. We used to need a translator. I think he wrote the Cockney Bible. Do you know there is a Bible called the Cockney Bible? I think he wrote it. Anyway, so he's giving it all this, geezer. And I went, you can't speak for 90 minutes. I said, right, if you're coming in here with us, you can't speak for 90 minutes, okay? Just go, ooh, practice non-verbal communication. And so we go in, and we're all sitting in the away end, and the level of, honestly, they don't speak life at football stadiums. That's all I'll say. And they're chanting on us. Well, anyway, it's in the days of Frank Lampard, when Frank Lampard played for West Ham. The glory days, that one season where we finished 7th. Oh, praise the Lord for that season. Anyway, so we were there, and Frank Lampard curls a free kick into the top corner, and the three of us go, what's he doing? Anyway, and but inside we were like, there were little people dancing inside of us, and we were trying to, take it down. But we were in hostile territory, and it's jovial, but it was hostile. It was really, if they had worked out we were West Ham fans, I genuinely think it would have been A&E. I don't think we would have been going on. It literally was so hostile, you could feel it. And we made it out because Leeds won 4-1 in the end. But I don't think we really get what it's like to walk into hostile territory. We think we're being got at if somebody writes an article about Christianity in the Times. Or a Bible society, is this being recorded? Our Bible society, we sometimes feel like we're getting got at when the atheist society or the secular society write us some stroppy emails. I think this is unbelievable courage of a young girl aligning herself with somebody who could do nothing for her, really, going into a hostile situation. And they head back. And Naomi, you imagine as well, they see Naomi and they go, is that Naomi? So they obviously recognize her after all these years. And her response is, don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. And she starts to lament. She laments in Moab, and then she laments in Bethlehem. Can I tell you that could be punishable by death? The fact that you would lament with such rage in a woman lamenting in a public place with such rage about Yahweh was a serious problem. A serious problem. Sometimes we don't quite understand that that actually her crying out to God was something that would have been seriously frowned upon. Seriously. Because she was an older woman, it probably wouldn't have been such a serious action against her. But this is a very provoking act. And she laments before God. It's really interesting here, isn't it? That the Bible is very comfortable with lament. Somebody said to me the other day, "Oh, I'm not sure about lament." I said, "Well, take out half the Old Testament then. There's a whole book called Lamentations." What does Jesus do? On the cross, he laments. He said, my God, he's quoting the Psalms, but he's lamenting. Why have you abandoned me? Where are you? In the garden, sweating drops of blood. Have you tried doing that? You've got to be under serious duress. And he's crying out to his Father, and he's saying, the big story. Can we change the chapter? This cup. And what does God do? He just sends angels to comfort him. Sometimes we don't see answers to prayer because an angel has been sent to comfort us when actually what we're looking for is something completely different. And we're like, God hasn't answered my prayer. In the story that I talked about, when we saw Dominic for the first time in the flesh, something triggered in our head that the vision of family that we had was going to be different. It's not anyone else's story in this room, it's our story. I'm not putting this story on you. And I remember one day when he got a bit older and he was sitting with us and we kind of looked at each other and it was like, that's the picture. That's the picture. But it was not in the way we thought it would work out. And suddenly we've got this reimagination of family that's way beyond what we could imagine. I don't even think about that boy anymore as my adopted son. He's my son. I love him. I love the fact that when he first turned up, he was so scared he'd hide. Now he sits around a table and looks at me and says, "Make me toast, Dad." And you know, what's really interesting about it all is he didn't come looking for us. We went looking for him. He came to our house with all the mess and all the pain. We didn't throw him out, even though it was rather tempting, with all the trauma and the difficulty. He then spends time with us, and he suddenly starts to have our mannerisms and talk like us a bit. I look at him and I think, oh, he's standing and he's got the same mannerisms as his mum. Thank goodness he doesn't have mine. That is a blessing. And so you watch him grow and develop. And then I suddenly read, one day the judge calls us and he says, oh, he doesn't call, we got an email saying, he is now legally your son. He now bears your name and he has all the rights to your estate. And I'm looking over at this kid with chocolate sauce all over his face, thinking, what have you done to get into this position? Absolutely nothing. We're all adopted into God's family. See, that's the good news. That's the good news. You can't do it on your own. God has to intervene in all the misfortune, in all the pain. But let me tell you this. Was this story in Naomi and Ruth's mind at the very beginning? Ruth 1, chapter 1? No. I have so many questions. Can I say that? I have more questions now than I have answers. But I know that God is not hidden. I know that he is present. And I'm learning in my life, by my fingertips, to embrace the unlikely reimagination of what he's doing. I can honestly say that I don't know if I'd be able to love a human being more than when my son jumps on my lap and he says, "Dada." And I weep over him, over the pain of his life and the misfortune and the difficulty. Yet his story was not finished. Your story is not finished. the pain, the difficulty. But let me tell you this, it is important in it all to create space to lament, to cry out to God. You know, in the tradition I grew up in, lament was seen as a lack of faith. We were often discouraged to do it because we're living in the victory. Do you know the importance of lament is that you're going to God with your pain, not to the alcohol cabinet. You're going to God with your pain and not pornography. You're going to God with your pain and any other thing that we could find comfort from. Lamenting is the greatest act of faith that we can show because we are coming to God with our distress. And so that's what Naomi's doing. And what's interesting, as we're queuing ourselves up for the next session, which is tonight, we're finding that there's something in the lament that changes the story. Like Ruth 1 is kind of like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. This is, please no, please no. Oh, has anybody ever watched, is it The Three of Us? Is that the name of the Netflix thing with the... Yeah. And I mean, boy, that's a story about, like, you know, adoption and fostering, and it's dear to my heart for obvious reasons. If you haven't watched it, watch it. Oh my, you will need chocolate, you'll need tissues, and you'll need to press the pause button with discipline because you'll watch 7 episodes in one go. Or is that just me? It is a remarkable story, a powerful story. But the thing through it all is that it's the lament in that story that changes the atmosphere. And it's the lament in this story that shifts the dial. God is not upset with the lament. In some ways, he hears it. You can see it. He's present. He's in there. He's working. I remember somebody saying this once, and when I first heard it, I thought, really? And then I laughed when I thought about it. A friend of ours was teaching, and he said, you know, one of the names of God that didn't make it in was Jehovah Sneaky, because he does more behind your back than he does in front of your face. And initially, I was like, oh, I'm not too sure about Jehovah Sneaky. And then I suddenly thought, yes, actually, a lot of my life, the Lord's been doing more behind the scenes than I'd ever imagined. Ever. And so we see this thing here, a call from a broken heart, crying out. I'm going to finish. Let's not rush from this moment. When I say rush, I mean, pack our Bibles away and then within 30 seconds we're off to the next thing. Let's spend just a little bit of time. I'm going to hand over to Stephen in a minute. Just a short amount of time, just to sort of come before God and just say, here I am. Like, do you know what? Some of us, we may have parked so much stuff over there, and that's fine. I have. But there's something about a lament, about a calling out to God that shifts the story here in the book of Ruth, despite everything. And I just want to give us that time, just even a short amount of time, to do that, so that as we go into chapter 2 and chapter 3, we'll see the story developing in a really deep way. But I think the book is written in such a way that when you get to the end of chapter 1, if you go straight into chapter 2, it jars. There's a jarring, because you'll see a shift in the narrative. And it's like it's written, so when you get into chapter 2, oh, and by the way, there was this man called Boaz, right? He's suddenly going, you've just thrown all of that at me, and now I'm just... And it's deliberate, because it's saying, don't rush from that place. Don't stay in that place for too long either, but don't rush. Amen.